yes, Dr. Merrill, or yes, Dr. Smith, or whatever the doctor's name was. And that technology had been developed in partnership with IBM, but Computer Motion didn't have a patent on it. Now, Intuitive Surgical had a patent, their patent, 200-300 pages long. It'll serve coffee, it'll tie your shoes, it'll tell you the weather. I mean, it does everything, right? Or so the patent says, and therefore, the judge agreed with Intuitive Surgical, and so there's no battle there, and they had to forfeit, and the companies became one. They immediately shut down the competitor's line. So there's only one robotic system available in the United States at this time, and they have the patents on everything. So really no competition, or so you would assume. The stock, by the way, in 2003 was $4 a share. Now it's $350. Good investment. So historically, Computer Motion, NASA related, so related to both space operations, which you heard the previous speaker talking about, the Mars rovers. They were adapted for surgery, and then DARPA, which stands for the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, the inventor of the internet, if anybody didn't know that, they developed it for battlefield needs. Now you saw how big that surgical robot is. Now to put a surgical robot in an airplane on a tarmac in Iraq or in Afghanistan, you might as well just have a bunch of them, push them out the back, and they could be used as bombs to drop on people because they're too big. You'd never fit it in a spacecraft, you'd never fit it in an airplane, you'd never fit it in the battlefield. You might fit it in a hospital where you're bringing people like I showed you in Landstuhl. And so you can see the transport. J. Johanneman is the gentleman here, the second one on your left, and then Peach Taylor was the gentleman looking forward. He's a former Surgeon General of the Air Force. So with robotic surgery, you have sort of total integrated care. You have minimally invasive surgery. Does anybody know when I talk about minimally invasive surgery, what I mean? So imagine you go in for a splenectomy. You're going to take the spleen out. My dad had this done in 1965. He's passed away, but he has a scar from under the right nipple all the way down here. And it looks like a railroad track. I mean, it's a huge scar. Today, with laparoscopic surgery, they put 4 holes in here, and they're small holes, so you can't even see them. They go in, one's for insufflation, makes the abdomen get bigger with carbon dioxide. The other one's a camera, and the other one are your instruments. And you can change the instruments in and out. So robotic surgery is now on top of that. So you do have the same number of holes, but the camera technology is much better, the instruments are much better, they're intuitive. That's the name of the company. Why are they intuitive? If I take an instrument through the abdominal wall, and I sort of go like this, and I want to go over here, if I'm doing it by hand in open surgery, I just go to the right. But if I want to go over here now, I got to go to the left. That's not intuitive. So with a robot, with the Da Vinci robot, you have the hand controllers sitting at that console in the middle. When you press your hands together, the instruments move. So it's in real time. So when you turn them, the instruments turn. So if I want to go this way, I go this way. And so that became a very, very useful tool. Well, if you can use those kinds of tools and you can start collecting the data and the information from the various devices, now I can maybe start developing a training procedure, or I can develop simulation. I can actually develop technologies that allows me to repeat the surgical procedure many, many times before I operate on the patient. That would be a great tool. And why is that important? Because it takes 5 to 7 years to train a general surgeon. If a general surgeon can be trained in less time, then we can graduate more of them, and that becomes important. Why? Because the baby boom population around the world is beginning to age, and we need things like, well, not me, but hip replacements and, you know, all kinds of knee replacements. I mean, things that we once thought were for those people who were much older than we are. Well, as we start getting that age, and those people, by the way, that were older are starting to live longer, and guess what? We're not addressing the medical education in this country. In the 1980s, they suggested we needed to open 60 new medical schools. It cost a lot of money to open a medical school. We did one here in Wright State back in the 60s initially as an extension of Ohio State. And so what ended up happening is that we have a shortage of doctors now. And in fact, in surgery, for every 30 residents that graduate from a program, and usually have 5 or 6 per university, per training program, 750 retire. So if they're retiring, now are they retiring because they're old? They might be retiring because they can't stand the fact that they've been told they can't make enough money, that Medicaid's not paying them, and then the whole healthcare reform is beginning to chase people away from it as well. So you start seeing that we have an impending problem from a healthcare perspective is certainly in a surgical perspective. And I talked to somebody in Canada the other day, and they said it's gotten worse because the same kind of system they want to build here is now beginning to fail in Canada, and they said it takes months to have surgery. Not procedure, but just to get it scheduled. So even though there's only the two companies that were competing and now only one, there are efforts underway by a number of other companies that are and universities that are developing technologies. In the upper right-hand corner is McDonnell Detweiler. They're the ones that developed the Canadarm for both the space shuttle and the space station. They have actually developed a neural arm because the Da Vinci can't do neurosurgical because the instruments are too big. Even though they're still small, they're still too big for doing brain surgery. The SRI M7 is sort of a Da Vinci-like. They're the ones that developed the Da Vinci to begin with. They have now developed what's called the M7, and the University of Washington Biorobotics Lab has developed the Raven robot. In traditional surgery, if you think about it, you know, like, say for instance, you're going to cut some chicken up to cook on the grill or clean a fish or whatever. I mean, you're right there. You feel it. You can feel the knife. You can feel the tissue you're cutting it, the vegetables you're cutting, whatever it is. You feel all that. You smell it. You hear it. But now you put yourself into minimally invasive surgery. Now you don't see everything. You see it on a camera. You don't feel it because you're not pulling on the tissue, and you don't feel that. And now you say, well, let's do telerobotic surgery. Now I move myself to a distant site away from it. Now I can't feel it at all. So you start seeing there's some differences there that we need to understand and perhaps develop better auditory, olfactory senses and haptic, a sense of touch. So this is the back of the Da Vinci robot, and it's connected by a cable 30 feet long to the controller. So the controller is where you sit down, and you have to keep your head immersed in this thing the whole time. So from a human factor's perspective, you think about what that does to the shoulder, and you're sitting there the entire time, and all this cabling is sort of out of the way where the patient is. Well, that's not conducive to doing telesurgery. And you can see this is an enormous setup. In this particular image, you can see the robot is on the other side. Now, one thing I guess I should clarify is the robot isn't really a robot. I mean, it doesn't do anything unless you manipulate it to do it. So you don't program and say, you know, do this spot weld or drive over to this crater. That can be done with that kind of robot, but these kind of robots, these are telemanipulation systems. So whatever you're moving, the movement of your hands, that's what's making the movement, what you're trying to do. So if you're trying to open and grasp something, it's doing the same thing you're doing. And so just to give you an idea, this robot's about $1.4 million. And the company doesn't make a lot of money selling the robots. What they make their money on are these instruments down here. And I guess just right here, there's quite a few different kinds, and they range from about $1,500 to about $2,500, $2,600 a piece. Price may have gone up a little bit. And they can only be used 10 times. Not because it breaks down, but because they want you to buy another one. I mean, anybody buy a Mac computer recently? Buy a Mac, you get a free printer. But guess how much the printer cartridges cost? You know, $30, $40, $50, $60, $100, whatever kind of printer it is. That's where they make their money. The other places they also make their money selling the annual service contract, which is $135,000 a year for 5-year minimum. So you basically spend $3 million. And you can't get reimbursed, by the way, from Medicare or Blue Cross and Blue Shield for using the robot. All you can do is get reimbursed for doing the procedure. So if you do a cholecystectomy, take the gallbladder out, the surgeon gets $800. It doesn't make any difference how you do it. Butter knife and a fork or the robot, doesn't make any difference. So it's interesting, we tried to start doing telesurgery in the United States back in the 90s when these robots began to be created, and the commissioner of the FDA was really not supportive of that. She actually was the provost for our health system, and she actually gave me a letter of recommendation the other day, so I don't want to say too many bad things, but the FDA was a little leery about moving down this path, so they went to France and Canada. Surprise. So here in this particular example, you can see both systems are the Zeus because the Da Vinci can't be used using Internet protocol. So here we have Operation Lindbergh. Crosses the Atlantic. Jacques Marescot is a surgeon here. He's using the computer motion Zeus. He's going to remove a gallbladder of a patient who's in France. She's a 58-year-old woman. It was done successfully. The bandwidth between New York and Strasbourg, France, unlimited, no big issue. Cost a lot of money, but not a big issue. On the morning of September 11th, they were on their way to the World Trade Center to give a news release, and they didn't get hurt, but they didn't make the press release. So it's the most missed story of 2001. It was the world's first example of being able to do surgery where surgeon was in New York and patient was in France. Very, very important. So here we have Marin Anvari. He's doing something similar, except he's going from Hamilton, which is on the outskirts of sort of a suburb of Toronto, up to North Bay, which is fairly, well, it's probably, I'm not sure if it's 100 miles, 1,000 miles or 1,000 kilometers. It's a long way away. And he used a much bigger bandwidth provided by Canada Bell, and he was doing all kinds of different surgical procedures, and I think he did 26 of them. And again, here in the United States, you know, we weren't willing to change our thought pattern. So we started thinking, okay, well, if we can't, well, first of all, the two companies merged and one company disappeared, so that platform no longer available. So we started looking at, well, what about the Da Vinci? Can the Da Vinci be used to do telerobotic surgery? And of course, the answer is yes if you buy this software upgrade and don't do anything else, of course. So we partnered, and the reason why the University of Cincinnati got involved is we had two surgical robots. We were one of the only universities at the time in Ohio that had two, one dedicated for clinical and one dedicated for research. Now the research one gets used with cadavers and pigs and goats and sheep. So you wouldn't want to say to the patient, oh, we're going to do an operation tomorrow, but we're going to use the animal, the one we used on animals yesterday, or the one we used on a dead body. That doesn't work. So you have to have one dedicated for clinical, one dedicated for research. And so we were able to, using the internet, once from Cincinnati, and then once from the American Telemedicine Association meeting in Denver in April, to California. The headquarters of Intuitive Surgical is in outside of San Francisco. So we were able to use the internet to do this procedure, and we did it without much latency. Latency meaning the time delay from the time Wolf Blitzer asks Christiana Amanpour a question. That delay, that's latency, and it's measured in milliseconds. The milliseconds were so small you couldn't tell the difference, and it worked fine. The pig survived from the kidney, the nephrectomy. We took the kidney out. So then we started saying, well, if we can do it over the internet from point A to point B, from a lab to a lab, or perhaps a hospital to a hospital, can we do it in an extreme environment? Now NASA has it's called the Aquarius Habitat. And the Aquarius Habitat is off the coast of Key Largo, and this is what it looks like. And people live, this is what it looks like above the water. People live in here for periods of 10 to 21 days. Kind of like the space station. On a space station, you live a little longer up there. And why is it an analog? Well, it's about 70 feet underwater. Anybody dive? So once you dive and you go down so far, and you're down there for like more than an hour or hour and a half, you can't just come right back up to the surface because you'll get the bends. And so what you end up having is you have to have all this stuff with you to do medical care in this environment. So that's why it's a nice analog. And so what we did is we took two different robots down there, the M7, which is right here, hanging from the bunks, and this portal is this portal right here, by the way. The window right there is the same window. And then the Raven actually is on the table. And the idea was to develop or evaluate how you could manipulate this robot from several different locations. One from the shore, about 5 miles away, it's like a condominium place where we had our lab set up. And then from Tennessee, where the American Telemedicine Association annual meeting was at the Gaylord, and then from Canada. And we're able to do that using wireless internet to actually manipulate these robots. The one up here was used to take this ultrasound probe, scan this fake blood vessel, it's a phantom blood vessel, and insert a needle in it. That's the first time that had ever been done. And this one was to use to determine if you could actually do the surgical tasks of the fundamentals of laparoscopic surgery. You pick up these foam blocks and you move them around, and you look at a monitor, and it's sort of they play loud music, like Top Gun music, and they see how fast you can